Within the Amber Chronicles, the wisdom of the past is preserved in a golden light for the leaders of the future. Join us as we unlock the lessons of history to find the keys to our own destiny. Click subscribe now and stay for the final chapter of the legend.
The hotel elevator was already closing when my sister-in-law stepped in front of me and let the door shut in my face. She didn't reach for the hold button. She didn't say anything. She just watched the numbers climb from behind the glass and turned back to whatever she was saying to my brother. I stood there in the lobby of the Ashford Grand with my garment bag over one shoulder and my overnight case in my other hand, surrounded by guests in cocktail attire, and I told myself the same thing I had been telling myself for 29 years. It was probably an accident. She probably didn't see me. I took the next elevator alone. My brother Owen's rehearsal dinner was being held in the Ashford Grand's private ballroom on the 14th floor. 200 guests, 5-course dinner, string quartet. My mother had called me 3 times in the week leading up to it to tell me that the venue was the most exclusive event space in all of Westbrook, that Owen's fiancée Cassidy's family had connections, that this was the kind of event where I needed to dress appropriately and not embarrass anyone. I did not tell her that I owned the hotel. That detail had stayed in a folder on my laptop for 3 years, one line in a holding company document that most people would need a law degree to decode. 31% of Ashford Hospitality Group, acquired quietly through a series of investments that started when I was 24 and working 16-hour days out of a 1-bedroom apartment in Columbus. The other stakeholders knew my name. The general managers of all 7 Ashford properties knew my face. The guests checking in downstairs did not, and neither did my family. The ballroom was everything my mother had described, and then some. Candles on every surface, white peonies in tall glass vases. Cassidy's parents stood near the entrance with the practiced ease of people who had attended many rooms like this one, greeting guests with the kind of warmth that costs money to learn. My mother was beside them, positioned just close enough to seem like she belonged to the host family. She spotted me from across the room. The expression that crossed her face was the one I had memorized at age 7, the one that said she was calculating something. Not quite relief that I had arrived. Not quite irritation. Something closer to assessment. "You look fine," she said, which in her language meant she had expected worse. My brother was holding court near the bar, still in the blazer he'd worn to the ceremony rehearsal, his arm around Cassidy's waist. He looked happy in a way that made something press against my ribs. I had not seen him look happy in a long time. When he noticed me walking toward them, his expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes shifted in the way it always did when I appeared somewhere he hadn't quite planned for. "Hey," he said. "You made it." Cassidy smiled at me with the warmth of someone who had been told to be kind. She had good manners. I had nothing against her. The problem was not Cassidy. My mother materialized at my elbow before I could say anything. "Come meet the Hargroves," she said, steering me by the arm. Cassidy's uncle flies in from Atlanta for these things. Very successful man. Real estate. I let her steer me. I smiled at the right moments. I answered questions about what I did, which always required a small performance of its own, a version of the truth carefully edited so as not to produce the kind of attention I wasn't ready for. "I work in investment," I said. "Acquisitions mostly." People's eyes glazed over at the right moment, and the conversation moved on. My seat at the dinner table was at the far end from where the immediate families were seated. I had not been assigned to the head table. Owen hadn't mentioned it. My mother, when I asked her 2 weeks ago whether there was a seating chart I should know about, had said the planning was all in Cassidy's hands and she hadn't wanted to interfere. The woman to my left was Cassidy's second cousin visiting from Phoenix. The man to my right was the husband of one of Cassidy's sorority friends. They were pleasant. We talked about the flight delays at Columbus Airport and whether the salmon was better than the chicken. The string quartet played something I recognized but couldn't name. Halfway through the entree, Cassidy's mother stood to give a toast. She spoke beautifully about her daughter, about the first time she brought Owen home, about what it meant to watch a child find the person they were meant to build a life with. She spoke for 5 minutes and I felt every word. Then my mother stood. She spoke about Owen for 4 minutes, his work in finance, his ambition, the way he had always known what he wanted. She told a story about him at age 12 winning a regional debate competition and how she had known even then that he was going to do something important with his life. She did not mention me. I was sitting 12 feet away. I picked up my water glass and drank from it and put it back down. After the toasts, people moved around the way they do at these events, clustering and reforming. I found myself standing near the window with a glass of Chardonnay, looking out at the city lights spread below the hotel, and I let myself feel, for just a moment, the weight of being in a building I partially owned while being treated like an afterthought by the people who should have known me best. My phone buzzed. A message from Terrence, my attorney, about a quarterly distribution from the Ashford portfolio. I typed back a quick acknowledgement and put my phone away. Owen appeared beside me. He'd loosened his tie. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. Mom's just stressed. She gets weird at these things." "I know." He looked out the window too. "It's a nice place, right?" Cassidy's family pulled some strings to get this room on short notice. I almost said something then. It was right there, rising in my throat. But I swallowed it back and said, "It's beautiful. You two deserve it." He clapped me once on the shoulder and drifted back toward Cassidy. I finished my wine and ordered another. 3 hours later, back in my room on the 9th floor, I sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet and thought about the conversation I'd had with my therapist the week before. She had asked me why I kept going to these events. I had said because they are my family. She had asked me what I hoped would be different. I had sat with that question for a long time and not answered it. The wedding was the next afternoon. I wore the slate blue dress I had brought for the occasion, the one that cost more than most people paid in rent, but which looked like something someone practical and understated would wear. That was the goal. I had been managing my appearance for so long that I didn't always notice I was doing it anymore. The deliberate choice of the modest car, the nondescript neighborhood where I kept my primary residence, the job title that revealed enough to satisfy questions without inviting scrutiny. I had spent years making myself small enough to move through my family's version of the world without disturbing the story they needed to believe. The ceremony was held in the hotel's courtyard garden, which the events team had transformed with white draping and 12 rows of chairs. I sat in the 3rd row on the groom's side, next to my aunt, my father's sister, who smelled like the same gardenia perfume she had worn my entire life and who squeezed my hand when the music started. Owen cried when he saw Cassidy come down the aisle. That surprised me. He had always held himself like a man who considered emotional visibility a kind of weakness. Standing at the altar with tears running down his face, he looked like someone I might have been close to, under different circumstances. I cried a little too, which surprised me even more. The reception began at 6 in the same ballroom from the night before, rearranged now for dancing and a 5-piece band. The seating chart placed me at table 11, which was near the back, between a colleague of Cassidy's father and a couple from Charlotte who had driven up for the weekend and didn't know anyone. My parents were at table 1. I had not expected anything different. I want to be honest about that. I had not dressed up some hope that this time would be different, that this event would be the one where my mother thought to put us in adjacent seats, where my brother would pull me into the receiving line with them. I had stopped carrying that hope a long time ago. What I carried instead was the quieter, heavier thing underneath it, the grief for what was not there, which is different from the hope that it might appear. The band was good. I'll give them that. They played something upbeat after dinner and the dance floor filled up, and I stayed at my table with a second glass of wine and watched my family from across the room. My mother was laughing at something Cassidy's father said. My father was talking to Owen's colleague, the one from the firm in Chicago, using the expansive gestures he used when he wanted to seem like he belonged somewhere. Owen and Cassidy were dancing, her dress moving with her, both of them oblivious to anyone else in the room. I watched them for a while and let myself feel whatever I felt about it. Then the hotel's general manager appeared at my elbow. Her name was Ingrid, and she was exceptionally good at her job. She was maybe 50, silver-haired with the kind of posture that comes from decades of navigating high-pressure rooms with grace. She had worked for Ashford for 11 years, and we had met in person twice, once during a property walkthrough when I was evaluating an additional acquisition, and once at a stakeholder dinner in Cincinnati. She knew my face. She knew my name. She did not, from her expression, know that she was approaching me at a family event where no one in the room was aware of who I was. Miss Hartwell, she said, and then caught herself. Because my last name was Hartwell, and apparently she had assumed the wedding party would be aware of that fact. The name hung in the air for a moment. Ingrid, I said, keeping my voice low. This isn't the right time. But she had already said it, and the table was quiet enough that the couple from Charlotte had heard it, and my aunt, who had migrated from table 3 to say hello, had also heard it. I'm so sorry, Ingrid said. I didn't realize. I saw your name on the guest list and wanted to personally make sure everything had been to your satisfaction. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's all right, I told her. Everything has been wonderful. She nodded once and excused herself with the discretion of someone who had just understood she had inadvertently done something significant. My aunt looked at me. What was that about? She asked. Nothing. She must have me confused with someone else. But my aunt had known me since I was born, and she had the look on her face that meant she was not confused at all, just deciding how to process what she had heard. The couple from Charlotte were exchanging a glance. The colleague of Cassidy's father leaned over. Are you staying at the hotel? I've heard management here is very attentive to their guests. Something like that, I said. I excused myself and went to find more wine. By the time I got back, the table's composition had shifted the way it does late in receptions, people drifting and circling. My brother had materialized in my path. He had a glass of scotch and the loosened tie look of a man settling into a good evening. Someone just told me the hotel manager came to your table, he said. People get confused sometimes. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when we were kids, and he suspected I was keeping something from him. Which was fair. I usually was. You work in acquisitions, he said slowly. Investment, yes? For who? Like, whose money? My money, I said. And other investors. He was quiet for a moment. His glass turned slowly in his hand. How much of this hotel is yours? I looked at him. 31% of the parent company. The silence between us was the specific kind that comes when a version of the world you have been operating in stops being the accurate one. He laughed, one short sound, not really a laugh. Are you serious? I am. For how long? 3 years. He shook his head slowly. His eyes moved around the room as if recalibrating the space. Then he said, Why didn't you tell us? I took a sip of my wine. I thought about the rehearsal dinner the night before, my seat at the far end. I thought about my mother's toast. 4 minutes on Owen, 0 on me. I thought about the elevator doors closing on my face. You never asked what I was working on, I said. He looked like he wanted to argue and then decided not to. He walked back toward Cassidy. I stayed where I was. 20 minutes later, my mother appeared. She looked different than she had all evening. Something in her face was rearranged. She had heard. Someone had told her, or she had seen Owen's expression after we spoke, or both. I need to talk to you, she said. I know. She steered me toward a quieter corner near the bar, away from the band. Her voice was low and careful, which was unusual. My mother was a woman who operated at volume. Owen says you have some kind of investment in this hotel. Partial ownership. Yes. She took a moment with that. How much are we talking about? Financially, I told her a figure, not the full picture, but a real number. She was quiet in a way I had rarely seen. And no one knew? Your father and I had no idea? No. Why would you keep that from your own family? I looked at her. I thought about every version of this answer I had ever rehearsed and then put away. I thought about the toast she had given the night before. I thought about all the times I had told her about a milestone and she had nodded and asked when Owen was getting married. Because knowing would have changed the way you treated me, I said. And I needed to find out how you treated me when you thought I had nothing. The silence that followed was not comfortable. She looked away, toward the dance floor where Owen and Cassidy were talking to her parents. Her jaw moved as if she was working through something. That's not fair, she said finally. I know you believe that. We have always been proud of you. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said, You gave a 5-minute toast last night. You talked about Owen for all of it. I was sitting 12 feet away. Her face shifted. I didn't. That wasn't meant to be. I know it wasn't meant to be. Anything? That's kind of the point. She pressed her lips together. The band started something slower. I have spent a long time making myself easy to overlook, I told her. Smaller apartment than I can afford. Modest car. Job title that doesn't invite questions. I wanted to see who you all were when you thought I was just your daughter who works in finance and doesn't have much to show for it. I wanted to know if you would be proud of me the same way either way, and…" I paused. The words sat in my throat for a moment. "You're asking the wrong question, Mom." She looked at me. "The right question is whether I'm proud of me. And I am. I have been for a while. But it took me a long time to stop waiting for you to be the one who decided that." She was quiet. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't let them spill over because we were at a public event and that was the kind of thing she managed. "What do you want me to do?" she said. "Tell me what you want." I thought about it honestly, the way my therapist had taught me to. "I want you to call me when I'm not performing at something," I said. "Not to ask about Owen's wedding, not to tell me what to wear, just to ask how I'm doing." She nodded once, small. "I can do that. I'll believe it when it happens." She flinched slightly. I hadn't meant it as a wound, but I also hadn't softened it, and I didn't apologize for that. My father found us about 10 minutes later. Someone had clearly filled him in on the broad strokes, because he had the look he wore when he was trying to recover authority over a situation that had slipped away from him. He was a man who needed to feel like he understood the room he was standing in, and right now the room had changed without his permission. "Your mother told me," he said. "Okay, why the secrecy?" "This isn't how family operates." I looked at him calmly. "You told me at Thanksgiving 3 years ago that my investment work wasn't a real career, that I should think about whether I wanted to do something more stable." He was quiet. "The following March, I closed a deal that included a partial stake in this property. I've been to 6 Ashford events since then in a professional capacity. You've never once asked me a single question about what I was working on. That's not, we were interested. We just didn't want to pry." I said nothing. Some things don't need a response. He looked at the floor for a moment and then back at me. "I suppose you're angry with us." "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm just done being easy to dismiss. Those aren't the same thing." He nodded slowly, the way he did when he was processing something he couldn't argue with. Owen reappeared, Cassidy beside him. Her expression told me she had heard some version of events. She looked uncomfortable in the way genuinely kind people do when they realize they have been adjacent to something unkind without knowing it. "I'm sorry you felt like you had to hide things from us," Owen said. I waited for the thing that was underneath that sentence, the part where he said, "But I also would have appreciated knowing," or the part where he acknowledged that maybe things had not always been perfectly equal. It didn't come. "I heard you," I said. He and Cassidy drifted back to the reception, and my parents stood with me for another minute or two in that corner by the bar, the 4 of us occupying a silence that felt different than the silences we had occupied before. Something had changed in the room's physics. I didn't know yet whether it would become anything. The reception wound down around 11. I walked my aunt to the lobby and she held both my hands for a moment before she got into her car. "You know, I've always known you were going to be something extraordinary," she said. "Since you were small. You had this look on your face like you were keeping track of everything." I laughed. "That sounds exhausting." "It suits you," she said, and kissed my cheek and left. I went back upstairs. My room was on the 9th floor, which was not the best floor in the hotel because I had not arranged my own accommodations. I had booked through the same wedding block as everyone else, paid the same group rate, requested nothing special. I had a standard king, a view of the parking structure, and a minibar I didn't touch. I sat on the bed and called my therapist's voicemail, which I did sometimes when something happened, and I needed to hear myself say it out loud before our next session. "I told my family tonight," I said. "Not everything. Enough. And I don't know what comes next, but for the first time in a long time, I don't think I need to know. I told them who I am. The rest is up to them." I hung up and sat in the quiet for a while. The thing about carrying a secret for years is that when you finally put it down, the absence of it doesn't feel like relief right away. It feels like a strange lightness that you haven't learned to trust yet. Like when you've been sleeping with your arm twisted under you and you finally move it, and the blood rushing back feels almost like pain before it feels like anything better. I had spent years watching my family operate under a version of the world where I was the one they didn't need to think about too carefully. The daughter in the modest apartment. The one who worked in finance, sure, but nothing flashy, nothing that required anyone to update their mental picture of her. My brother was the one they called with news. My brother was the one who got the 5-minute toast. I had told myself that I was protecting my privacy. That was true, as far as it went. But there was more to it than that, and I had gotten honest with myself about the more in the past year. I wanted to know. I needed to know whether they would see me the same way before and after. Whether the pride, if it ever came, was for me or for what I had achieved. Now I knew. The answer was complicated. The answer was the look on my mother's face when I told her the figure, the shift in it, the recalculation, the thing that moved behind her eyes. It was not the worst answer. It was not the answer I had hoped for. It was the true one, and I was learning that the true one was worth more than the hopeful one, even when it hurt more to hold. My phone had a few messages I hadn't checked. One from Owen, "Can we talk tomorrow before you head home?" I said yes. One from my mother, "I'm going to try. That's all I can promise." I stared at that one for a long time. I didn't respond that night, not because I was punishing her, but because some things deserve more thought than a quick reply in a hotel room at midnight, and I was working on giving important things the space they needed. In the morning, I had coffee in the lobby restaurant at a small table by the window, and Ingrid appeared, professionally, quietly, to apologize again for the interruption the night before. I waved it off. "It's all right. Things played out the way they needed to." She hesitated, then said, "If I may, you handled everything with remarkable composure." I thought about my mother's face, my brother's short, involuntary laugh, my father reaching for an authority he no longer quite had. "I've been practicing for a long time," I said. She nodded and left me to my coffee. Owen arrived at 9:30. He was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, the version of himself he'd been when we were kids, before he learned to perform for rooms. He ordered a coffee and sat across from me and didn't say anything for a moment. "I should have asked more questions," he said finally, "about what you were doing, about your life." "Yeah, I thought you were doing fine. I was doing more than fine. But that's not really the point." He looked at his coffee cup. "Mom called me this morning. She said some things." I waited. "She said you asked her to call sometimes. Just to talk. Not about me." "Yes," he nodded. "That's fair." I looked at him. He looked tired in the way that people do after their wedding, hollowed out by the good kind of exhaustion. He looked like my brother. He was like someone I might have been closer to if the geometry of our family had been different. "I'm not trying to blow anything up," I said. "I just needed you all to see me." "I see you," he said. "I'm sorry it took this long." That was the most honest thing he had said to me in years, and I didn't know what to do with it except receive it. We sat for another 40 minutes. We talked about Cassidy, about the honeymoon they had planned, about a project he was working on at the firm. He asked me, for the first time in recent memory, what my next acquisition was going to be. I told him I was looking at a boutique hotel group in the Pacific Northwest. He asked real questions. I answered them. When he left, he hugged me. It was not a perfunctory hug, the kind we usually exchanged at family events. It was a real one. I stood in the lobby after he walked out and breathed. The world didn't feel different exactly. My family hadn't transformed overnight into something new. My mother had sent one careful text. My brother had asked real questions. My father had looked at the floor and admitted he hadn't been paying attention. None of that was resolution. None of that was the ending I might have written for myself a decade ago when I still believed that the right reveal at the right moment would change everything. But I had learned something in the past few years, building a portfolio piece by piece in the background while my family held dinners I was seated at the wrong end of. I had learned that most things worth having are not built in moments. They are built in the slow accumulation of choices, which things you keep private and which you finally say out loud, which relationships you invest in and which ones you accept for what they are, which version of yourself you are willing to stop hiding. I had stopped hiding. That was enough for now. I checked out at 11, tipped generously because I always did and because the staff at this property had been exceptional, and drove back toward Columbus through a November morning that was cold and clear and full of light. My aunt called when I was on the highway. Just to check in, she said. I told her the drive was fine. She asked how I was feeling. I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. Like someone who finally put something down, I said. She knew what I meant without needing me to explain. That's the thing about the people who actually see you. You don't have to translate for them. I drove home with the windows cracked and the radio low and the quiet feeling of a woman who had finally stopped waiting for someone else to decide she was worth knowing. I thought a lot about why I kept quiet for so long. Not just at Owen's wedding, but for years before it. Every dinner where I sat at the wrong end of the table, every conversation where my mother pivoted to my brother before I finished my sentence, every holiday where my work was summarized as, "she does something in finance," and everyone moved on. I told myself it was privacy, that I valued my independence, that I didn't need the acknowledgement. Some of that was true, but the harder truth, the one I had to sit with alone in a hotel room I partly owned, was that I was waiting. I was waiting for them to notice on their own, to ask the right questions, to look at me the way they looked at Owen and decide I was worth looking at that carefully. What I've come to understand is that when you make yourself invisible to test whether someone will find you anyway, you are setting yourself up for an answer you already know. People don't look for what they've been trained not to see. My family had been trained, over a long time and in small ways, to understand that Owen was the one who required their full attention. I had never challenged that. I had accommodated it, and then I had quietly built an entire life alongside that accommodation and called it strength. It was strength in some ways. The discipline it takes to build something real while no one is watching is not nothing. But discipline without honesty is just a longer path to the same loneliness. I had done the work. I had failed to tell the truth. And those two things together kept me stuck in a version of my family that I had outgrown without anyone knowing it, including me. The night of Owen's wedding, when Ingrid said my name in that ballroom and everything shifted, that wasn't the moment I became someone different. I had been that person for years. That was the moment I stopped protecting everyone else from having to know it. What happened afterward was not dramatic. My mother sent a careful text. My brother asked real questions over morning coffee. My father admitted quietly that he hadn't been paying attention. None of it was the transformation I might have written for myself a decade ago. But I've learned that the people who matter to you don't always change all at once. Sometimes they shift by degrees, the way a room warms up slowly after someone finally opens a window. You don't wait for the temperature to be perfect before you decide to stay in the room. What I know now is this: the life you build in private still counts. The choices you make when no one is watching still shape you. And eventually, if you've been honest in your building and patient in your waiting, the truth has a way of walking into a room and introducing itself whether you planned the moment or not. I didn't plan that night. But I had spent years becoming someone who could handle it when it came. That's not luck. That's what it looks like when effort and integrity finally meet the right moment. You don't have to announce yourself. You just have to be ready to stop denying yourself when the room finally asks.